time once again for Community Forum, and we are very lucky to have with us live in the studios this morning Gerri and Bob Haynes. Gerri and Bob Haynes are both with Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. They have both been on the show before, and they are in this morning to talk about their recent medical delegation to Gaza, to which they had reported on to us just a few months ago. Gerri and Bob, thank you very much for coming in this morning and sharing your stories.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
So you have just returned from a delegation to Gaza back in early November, just last month.
Right.
And previously you have led at least 8 delegations, to my knowledge, and you had just been in Gaza in April. So what did you see this time around that was different compared to the previous trips?
Thank you. Well, all of our delegations are sponsored by Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, which made its first trip into Gaza in January of 1993. For a long time, we went into Gaza to get information and come back and report on it. But after Kasled, which was the Israeli invasion of Gaza in 2008, 2009, we began to think maybe it would be a good idea for us to take medical delegations in to actually do service rather than just gather information. So, in fact, that's what we've been doing, and we completed our 8th such trip in November, just this last month, following this summer's third war in such a short period of time. Actually, the people of Gaza expected this third war to go down in size and length because in 2008, 2009, the Kasled problem was one length, and X number of people were killed. And then in 2012, the invasion and war was much shorter, and fewer people were killed. And so this time, when this disaster started in July, people thought, well, there's a trend to fewer people being killed and the conflict going on for shorter periods of time. And that didn't happen. This conflict went on and on and on. More rockets came out of Gaza. More bombing happened from Israel. Many more people were killed, and the devastation was enormous. So when we went in November, following the 51 or 52 days of war over the summer during Ramadan, I was really unprepared to see the amount of devastation that had happened. Whole villages wiped out. Places where multiple families lived completely destroyed. A total disaster and a humanitarian disaster and potentially medical disaster to come, because we see people walking on the rubble of the buildings that were destroyed with no gloves, no masks, and exposing themselves to whatever toxics remain after bombing occurs. We know that there's a good potential that uranium-238 was used on some of the tips of the bombs. The explosives, many of them were called dime explosives. There are probably 1,800 or more unexploded ordnance pieces left in the rubble. 2 people have been killed subsequently going through the rubble. And because people want to find whatever remains, they're still scavenging through that, whatever remains of their homes. Plus, because building materials are very, very, very hard to come by, they're scavenging building materials out of what remains of the homes that were, or the apartment buildings that were, or the businesses, or the 56 mosques that were either fully or partially destroyed. And those building materials are also potentially toxic or contain toxic substances. So my hope is that from a public health standpoint and from an ongoing genetic health standpoint, that there will be some investigation of what remains in those piles of rubble. Anyway, it was terrible. What happened was a disaster, and people are feeling the effects of the shock from that disaster. here in the United States, we've talked about this before here, Mike, post-traumatic stress disorder, and how that term, that name for something doesn't apply in Gaza because there is no post to what happens there. People just are waiting for yet another attack and another disaster to happen. This time, because it went on so long, many people that I talked to said, I waited every day not to wake up the next day. I waited every day to die. People of a lot of education, very well-spoken, highly productive people who just had decided that probably this was the end for Gaza because it went on for so long and the destruction was so widespread.
You included in your dispatches from Gaza that you did at Larry Johnson's website that one of the many people that you met while you were there and had met previously was a 12-year-old boy that in his short lifetime he'd known 3 wars and constant city under siege.
That's true. And in fact, if you think about that, when the Israelis withdrew, that's been, 9 years ago now, from the internal settlement inside Gaza, then there was a war between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. So, in fact, that war then began this series, which is 2006, and then Hamas takes over, and then the siege begins, which is another kind of war. Siege means that all the borders of Gaza, including the sea border, are closed and regulated. For a long time, there were tunnels that had been dug into Egypt, and all those tunnels are now closed so that money and goods and services and people who were going through the tunnels can no longer have that access. So right now, as of today, I'm pretty sure that Rafah is still closed. The Egyptian border is closed. The only way for people to go in and out of Gaza is through Eretz, Israel, and that's extremely, extremely restricted. And the only way for goods to get in and out of Gaza is one passageway regulated also by Israel called Kerem Shalom down near the Egyptian border. So what comes in and what goes out is totally regulated. The sea border is regulated by Israel, and gunships patrol that border. The people of Gaza have access to 3 nautical miles because sewage is either partially or fully untreated and runs directly into the Mediterranean. Those 3 nautical miles are rather polluted, and the fish that grow there are not the big, healthy fish, but the smaller fish, the more immature fish. There's a theory that one of the reasons that the border has been brought into 3 nautical miles rather than out to 20 nautical miles is that there is a natural gas reservoir, a very large one and 2 smaller ones actually, that are off the coast of Gaza that could potentially mean a big difference economically for Palestinians. And you'd have to Google the Gaza Marine to get better particular information about that. But there is a theory that the Gaza Marine natural gas fields are at least partially behind the reasons for this present disaster that is happening. And so that 12-year-old boy has really never known anything resembling peace or anything resembling security. And what we see in Gaza with children is that the normal feeling that your parents will protect you and provide for you security gets eroded because no one is secure and no one can protect anyone. And live in an environment of such insecurity is a devastating thing all by itself.
Again, that was included in your dispatches, talking about how this latest bombing disaster happened during the hot summer months, and people, because of the bombing, had to stay indoors. There was no safety outside. And you talk about a particular family with a father who the children looked to for protection was helpless.
Right. And that's true. I'd like to tell you about a young man, a psychiatrist named Yasser, who is the head of the Gaza Community Mental Health Program. The Gaza Community Mental Health Program, since 1993, has been our host when we go into Gaza. They're like an NGO, so they're not affiliated with a government on either in any way, other than that everybody has to work through government things, just as we do. There are regulations. But the Gaza Community Mental Health Program is now really stretched to provide mental health counseling to the people of Gaza. They have counterparts in the United Nations because the United Nations Relief Works Association provides a lot of care in Gaza, really the majority of care for people in Gaza, because most of the people are refugees. The majority of people are refugees from 48 and 67. But Yasser, whose personal devastation from this last event this summer, lost 28 people in one bombing, 28 family members in one bombing. In my previous encounters with him, he was kind of gentle and a little shy and not very forthcoming in some ways. And now his response to this disaster in his own family and the disaster to the people throughout Gaza is that he has organized himself to commit to providing service for the people of Gaza in a far more extensive and well-organized way. To speak with him and listen to the spirit of his dedication to helping the people of Gaza was really inspiring. He just has decided that rather than to live in the sorrow, which of course he experiences on a daily basis, he is going to rededicate himself to making things better for the people. Very, very loving and very kindly response to a really terrible event in his life.
Talk also about, there was an orphanage, I believe, that you visited while you were there. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. You want to talk about the orphanage?
Well, know that orphans are defined there as children of families in which the father has been killed or is no longer available to protect and provide, is the definition of an orphan. And 1,700 new orphans were created in this last bombing, this last war. And so this orphanage is having a hard time keeping up. You can imagine lots and lots of people take in other children and other family members in this tribal society. It's not something that's done as an onus on them and a terrible thing. It's a pride. It's something that's just very natural, where people look after other people. And it's part of the reason that I love going back there over and over again, that it's a different attitude. I love seeing how people care for one another in this place. And so these orphans are cared for. And an orphanage previously was sort of an oddity because people did look after one another, but there are just so many families that are devastated and wiped out that there are now these kids that the orphanage has become quite a force and very successful. But as you can imagine, it is over subscribed and underfunded, if you will, and it looks to the people in the neighborhoods to try to help with funding, and I'm not sure of other funding
there
sources.
Are people who donate to that orphanage, but there are already 22,000 orphans in Gaza, and now you add in these 1,700 more. Of course, there's no way that one building can take in all of those kids, so they see who needs to have in-home orphanage care most of all. It's a triage kind of process to get kids into the orphanage, right?
And they get them so that they're going to the local schools in the neighborhoods and participating in the community as best they can and getting ready for life. They start out at quite young. I think the youngest is 3, 4 years of age, and go up to 16. And throughout this process, the kids are learning how to have a trade, and many go on to university and become quite useful members of society. But even that, having a university degree by no means like here, but much worse there, by no means assures that you'll have a job or a trade, or physicians, nurses. Lots of people are well trained, and yet there are no jobs. The jobless rate is listed as 40%, but that is only counting the men, and lots and lots of people who have jobs are not being paid in the last many months because of the circumstances there.
The economic depression of Gaza is profound. The United Nations Relief Works Association can't possibly keep up because they're also underfunded. Now, if the people of Gaza could get the materials to rebuild again, then there would be jobs in rebuilding. The question would be who will pay them, because their trade problem is so enormous. It used to be that Gaza exported fruits and vegetables that they grew, but because the closure is so intense, very few things are exported now, so the income into Gaza is small. It used to be that people went out of Gaza into Israel to work, and pretty much that doesn't happen now. So the economy is devastated also primarily by the closure, and then by the fact that the materials that have been promised to come into Gaza to rebuild what was destroyed have pretty much not been coming in. A few materials supposedly are coming in, but not very many. And there was that conference in Cairo of all the donor nations that said, well, we're going to give this many billions of dollars to make sure that Gaza gets rebuilt. The people of Gaza, not knowing exactly how this works, are kind of perplexed at how that happens, because the United States gives Israel more foreign aid than any other country on earth. And a lot of that foreign aid comes through military, through weapons. And then those weapons get used on Gaza to destroy Gaza. And then the international community commits to fund materials to rebuild Gaza, and those materials come through Israel, so that Israel then, according to the Palestinian thinking, destroys and then profits from the reconstruction. It's a vicious kind of circle. And of course, the people of Gaza are not unaware that Israel gets more funding through U.S. tax dollars than anyone else on earth. And so there is a feeling that how do we trust the United States? And when we go into Gaza, we go in realizing that we are U.S. citizens, and part of our tax dollars have been used directly or indirectly to harm them. And so the building of trust in our relationships with the people of Gaza is of concern, that we go in and want people to trust that we're coming in good faith, but it takes time to build that kind of trust, because they've been hurt so badly. There is no closure to the sorrow that they feel. Everyone that we talked to this time had experienced the death of somebody close to them. And there are at least 1,000 children who remain permanently disabled. We talk about the deaths, 1,800, 2012 deaths from the summer incursion, but remaining are at least 1,000 children permanently disabled, and at least that many adults permanently disabled, so that the burden on the medical community and on families is yet to be told how severe that is.
And while all this is happening, then as you were there, Israeli warplanes continue to fly overhead. So, I mean, there's really like no off switch to this if you live there.
Right. Well, you can hear the planes flying over, and of course that causes people to cringe. And then there are armed drones that fly over pretty much all the time. And people are aware of those drones, and they're an ominous feeling. Do you know that any moment a little drone could drop something that would end the life of your child or end your life or destroy your building? Right before the ceasefire this time, sort of to prove a point, 2 major apartment buildings were completely demolished. One was, I think, 14 stories and one was 13 stories tall. Apartment buildings in Gaza house whole families at different levels. Homes in Gaza house whole families, generations of families at different levels. It's, you know, if you had a 6-story building here, that would probably mean that there were 6 different unallied people living in it. In Gaza, if you have a 6-story building, it's probably generations of the same family living in it. So that's, in fact, how Yasser's family, 28 members, were killed, because they were living in a multifamily dwelling that on different levels people were killed. There's no end to the stress of all of this.
That was another example you included, that after the bombing, I believe one of the people you met had housed 54 members of her family in a 2-bedroom apartment.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
You know, during the summer, I have a friend in Gaza who helps us to organize our time when we're there. He's a public relations person. And so I called him almost every day. And, of course, with the electricity cut, as much as it was, to get his cell phone charged, it was a bit of a challenge.
So you called him during the bombing?
Yeah, I called him every day. And sometimes the bombing was about to start, and sometimes I could hear bombs going off in the background. And I would say to him, you don't have to use up a lot of your cell phone time. I just need to know that you're alive. Just please tell me that you're alive, that your family is alive, that where are you? And he would say, well, we're over at my mother's house, and there are 50 members of my family living here. Or in one instance, another friend was in a house where there were 100 family members gathered. Well, people are sleeping on the floor. People are sleeping, you know, and the electricity's out, so it's dark, and the water is polluted. How do you get water? And, water, a whole nother problem for the people of Gaza, because the Gaza aquifer has been overpumped, and so salt has entered from the Mediterranean into the aquifer. Israel has drilled wells all along the land border with Gaza, and so the fresh water that might go into the aquifer is withdrawn. And just in the last 2 months, there's a report out saying that desalinated water that they're now having to feed to their families is causing osteoporosis and cancer in children, because they don't have the facilities to change the filters often enough. So they're having really, really devastating effects of drinking the, quote, desalinated water. The public health, I alluded to this earlier, the public health disaster in Gaza is so widespread. There almost isn't a part of Gaza that isn't negatively affected from the standpoint of public health. Direct medical care in Gaza has also been severely affected. To be able to provide hygienic care in the situation where people are being brought into a hospital, and even the ambulances are targeted during the war, to be able to take safe and adequate care of people gets compromised straight along the line. And then with medicines being in low supply and anesthetics being in low supply and crowding in hospitals and crowding in living places, resulting in things like an epidemic of scabies during the summer, during Ramadan, during the heat, and pregnant women becoming dehydrated and babies being lost. You almost can't draw a complex enough medical picture to say what a disaster the summer was and how deep and serious the consequences of that summer are in the ongoing care of medical people.
How would you characterize the people? I see we're getting near the end of the half hour. The people's response to all this, though, would you say hope remained, or that they were more hopeless?
Well, one of the characteristics of traumatic stress injury is hopelessness or a feeling of helplessness. And because our experience, and you would agree, I think, our experience of the people in Gaza is that they're extremely resilient.
Yes.
Say about the medical people that you dealt with.
But I think it gave them purpose and meaning to go continue their jobs, their work. The medical school was up and running, even though it was much devastated. They were working in bombed-out classrooms and so on within a week after the end of this terrible thing. And when I was giving lectures and giving seminars, these medical students, residents, the medical staff, people, they were full of energy and eager to learn as they had been before. You wouldn't know that all this had happened if you just went in the classroom. We keep using this word resilience. It's just an amazing bunch of people who, they shrug their shoulders and say, "What can you do?" But and their belief in Allah and meaning of this has to have some meaning for them someplace.
I agree. And over and over we talked with young people, and this is really inspiring to all of us. I think we talked with young people, young men and women in their early 20s up to their 30s, who have become educated through the university system, don't have jobs, are doing volunteer work on emergency rigs or in hospitals, and also doing side jobs of working with children, teaching them to dance and sing, helping them to go out into the community and do things that help their communities. It's amazing how these children, what to me are children in their 20s, are taking on the job of helping the younger children in their community to survive and thrive. We have a good friend in Gaza whose name is Reem Abu Jaber, who was the first administrator of Katan Center for the Child. After she finished that work and went away to Europe for about 6 months, she has come back and lives with her family in central Gaza in Deir Bella and has started an art and culture center for children in Deir Bella, where she is bringing in children, working with people from Germany to instruct lots of people to help children, and been bringing in children from the community to help them to survive and thrive, respect their culture, and then also go out into their community to help and be agents of peace in their community.
Well, unfortunately, we are pretty much out of time. How can people find out more about your delegations and your work?
Anyone who wants to is invited to email me at iggydog, IGGYDOG, at AOL.com. Wow, that's an old address now. Or contact Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, www.wpsr.org. And one of the things that has really helped us in this last delegation was that local Muslim community helped us to raise money, contributing that through WPSR, which takes no money out. And so we take all of the money that is contributed to WPSR to help the people of Gaza goes to the people of Gaza in the form of medicines and toys for the children and books for the library, so that really we were able to take in this time a goodly supply of medicines, and we were really grateful for that.
Desperately needed medicines. So, all right. Well, I want to thank you both for coming in and spending time with us again this morning.
Thank you, Mike.